from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. For March 24th, 2010, the 29th legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly. Here are your hosts.
And good evening, everyone. Welcome to Lawmakers on this 29th legislative day. Both chambers remain in session at this hour. I'm Wandy Lawson.
And I'm Susan Hoffman.
Coming up on tonight's program, an exclusive interview with House Majority Whip Edward Lindsey, and concerns are raised over the House Appropriation Committee's passage of the hospital provider tax.
But first, our top story for you. Governor Perdue plans to pursue legal action against the federal government without the help of the Attorney General. Again, the question really is, will the governor file suit? His plan is to go forward, but the question remains, will he? How will he go about filing suit against the federal government over new health care mandates? At this hour, the governor is trying to decide. He's been in meetings this afternoon. On Monday of this week, you recall the governor asked Attorney General Thurber Baker to file the suit on behalf of the state, claiming it would be too costly to the state and to the country. Perdue also questioned if it was legal. Well, today, Baker officially told the governor via letter he was not going to take action because he didn't think there was a viable legal reason to do so, that the federal government was within its limits, and it would be too costly to taxpayers to fight it out in court.
You know, we were asked by Governor Perdue to take a look at the legal question, and that is whether or not there's any basis for bringing such a lawsuit. We looked at it. We looked at the U.S. Constitution. We looked at relevant case law. I came away convinced that there's no viable legal basis to do so, and that in the process, if the state were to pursue such a course of action, that we'd end up with a negative result, and we'd end up spending a lot of taxpayer dollars at the same time.
House Speaker David Ralston says that he is disappointed that the Attorney General won't file the suit against the feds in light of the new mandates. He says going forward without him is an option and will be considered.
I think that in light of his ruling, we're going to have a discussion probably this afternoon as to what recourse the state has. As all of you know, many states, many of our neighbors here in the South have decided to join in some action in the federal courts, and I was hoping that Georgia would be a party to that, and so we'll need to have that discussion.
What we're going to do now is look at our options, and that could be Georgia going it alone and filing a lawsuit. It could be joining other states. I think there's 13 or 14 other states that have already filed a lawsuit, and so his refusal to participate doesn't preclude us from moving forward, and we've done that on a number of other cases that have come up over the years, and so we'll begin that work immediately.
Burt Brantley, the governor's press secretary, went on to say that the suit won't cost the state a penny. The governor has found attorneys who were willing to take the case for free. And according to Attorney General Thurber Baker, the governor is free to go forward without the suit, or with the suit rather, without his blessing. House Democratic leader DeVos Porter says the governor is using the suit to deflect attention away from his legislative shortcomings.
They want to take the attention off of what they've done in Georgia. Here we are in the last of it, and we're spending time on this instead of figuring out a transportation plan that this governor hadn't gotten right for years. He's cut education now another, $1 billion this year. He's jeopardizing a world-class university system, and he wants to take the fight of something that happened in Washington. I think he's wrong.
The governor is holding a press conference tomorrow. His press secretary says that we should expect a firm decision as to whether or not he'll go forward at that time. And the House Appropriations Committee has approved House Bill 307, expected to generate $175 million annually by taxing medical providers nearly 1.5% on net revenues, 1.5%. But some say a deal was made without input from those on the front lines. Lawmakers' Valerie Edwards is live at the Capitol with more. Valerie.
Susan, this document received anonymously in the Lawmakers studio this morning appears to be the basis of House Bill 307. It's titled Joint Proposal Provider Payment Agreement, and listed here are the Georgia Hospital Association, the Georgia Alliance of Community Hospitals, and Hometown Health.
And referring to the General Assembly, it reads in part that leadership will try not to cut Medicaid for 3 years, will stop bills harmful to hospitals, including any attempt to repeal the not-for-profit tax-exempt status, and requires hospitals be allowed to count revenue payments toward its indigent care commitment. No one involved in the negotiations would speak on the record regarding this document or House Bill 307. However, I did learn that some in the hospital community felt compelled to pay if they want to play. Remember, originally medical providers faced a Medicaid rate cut in excess of 10%. But others say the compromise was reached without input from the state's more than 6,000 doctors.
Ambulatory surgery centers that are physician-owned are directly affected by this bill, and the Medical Association of Georgia, the Georgia Ambulatory Surgery Society, or the Georgia chapter of American College of Surgeons, none of us were notified or invited to the discussions on this bill.
The Provider Payment Agreement Act of 2010 requires hospitals to pay nearly 1.5% revenue tax annually, which, paired with federal dollars, will be used to sustain Medicaid here in Georgia. It's expected the measure will bring in an estimated $175 million to the state's coffers each year. However, notwithstanding the fact that HB 307 will expire in June 2013, some call the bill the latest assault on physicians.
Over the last 3 days, doctors have taken a big hit, from national health care to the tort reform decision that overturned the caps in Georgia, to now this tax on ambulatory surgery centers. What we want to have in Georgia, we want an environment where physicians want to come practice, because when you have that environment, physicians will come and they will treat the patients, especially those patients that are most in need.
Late this afternoon, I asked the governor's floor leader, Representative Jim Cole, if this bill has a chance, given that crossover day is currently scheduled for just 48 short hours away. His response: the current budget crisis demands the General Assembly do something, and this measure appears to be it. Reporting live for Lawmakers, I'm Valerie Edwards.
Thanks so much, Val. We appreciate it.
Lengthy debate in the Senate this evening that led to the passage of bills expanding the right of licensed gun owners to carry weapons in bars, at the airport, and on college campuses. Senate Bill 308 includes a provision preventing the police from arresting gun owners who carry concealed weapons.
If a person who's lawfully carrying walks into a situation and law enforcement stops him for carrying a concealed weapon and they have a license, the law officer cannot consider that license when he's trying to figure out whether a crime has been committed or not. It is an affirmative defense, which means that you can be arrested, booked, thrown in jail, and sit in jail until you have your day before a court and tried, and then at your trial you can offer a defense that I have a license. And the judge at that point in time will say you have an affirmative defense, therefore the case is dismissed. What we're doing here is we're saying that the license is an element of the crime. In other words, when a law enforcement officer stops someone for supposedly carrying a concealed weapon and they produce their license, the officer can consider whether or not, can look at that license, and if it's a valid license, then they cannot detain the individual after that.
The City of Atlanta has challenged the state's public carry laws in court. Atlanta Senator Vincent Ford asked whether the General Assembly has the right to override the city when it comes to gun carry on MARTA and at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport.
If we had different cities and different counties and any other political subdivisions that tried to come up with their own policy, then we truly would have a lot of confusion in this state, and that's why there are certain things that we have a statewide policy when it comes to, and firearms has been one that we've had in that position, so that we can have a very clear law that people know where they can and where they cannot carry.
And Senate Bill 308 did pass the Senate today by a vote of 41 to 12, moving it over to the House. A similar measure, Senate Bill 291, addressing the issue of firearm carry at airports, also passed by a vote of 43 to 10. And the Senate today also votes to expand the number of agencies that provide input about services for people with mental illnesses or developmental disabilities. Senator Renee Unterman explained Senate Bill 375.
It came to our acknowledgement that we needed to add the commissioners of labor, the state school superintendent, and the board of pardons and paroles. And the reason that addition was needed was because we were talking about and discussing these other departments, and they were not being at the table.
Senator Mitch Seabaugh successfully amended the bill to remove instructions for placing children after the termination of parental rights. SB 375 passed without dissenting vote and moves to the House. Senator Unterman says she'll work on the child placement issue next year. Mental health advocates hail the efforts to integrate services between agencies, but they say they remain unsure about how the $70 million proposed by the governor for the Department of Behavioral Health will be allocated.
We'd like the money to go into community services. We'd like money to go into housing and supported employment. Clearly, we think there's a right path for this money, but right now, the fact that there's any money in the budget at all is a really good thing.
There's money to move 150 folks from the state hospitals to the community, and that's a sort of a total budget package. There is no money currently in the budget for people in the community who are at risk of institutionalization.
Now, according to Pat Noby, there are 5,000 such developmentally disabled people in need of services here in the state of Georgia.
After extensive debate today, the Senate decided to table a bill that would allow Georgians to purchase insurance approved for sale in other states. Lawmakers' Keosha Howard has the details on Senate Bill 407.
Senator Judson Hill, sponsor of SB 407, says the measure will give Georgians more options and access to affordable health care. He explains Senate Bill 407.
Allowing Georgians to cross state lines to buy health insurance is the right answer, and it's an answer that's time has come. It's the best for Georgia families, and it allows you to choose what's best for your family.
Some senators believe the bill is not as good as it seems.
This bill is not for the people who don't have insurance. This is the annual gift to the insurance companies bill. So we put it in the hands of one insurance commissioner, one person, whose campaign is financed moreover and mostly by the insurance companies in Georgia and the United States, to make the decisions that 4 other states' laws can come in here and operate our laws and circumvent our laws.
Others cite that purchasing health insurance from other states could mean that some services would no longer be covered, namely women's services.
We could see insurance companies come in and underprice Georgia insurers and fail to include coverage for things like screenings for mammograms, pap smears, prostate cancer, 2-day stays for women and newborns.
That was Lawmakers' Keosha Howard bringing us that report. The bill, again, Senate Bill 407, was tabled.
Senator Don Thomas's perennial attempt to expand the seatbelt law passed the Senate today. Now, although the measure was opposed by longtime House Speaker Tom Murphy and more recently by Speaker Glenn Richardson, Senator Thomas says the bill's chances are better this year.
As you know, for 4 years, this bill has rested in the Ag Committee in the House. And the reason for bringing this new bill is to get it into public safety or motor vehicle on the other side. We have a new speaker over there that I think will be sympathetic and to saving lives and saving a tremendous number of injuries. Every person in here signed it except 4. And I certainly hope those 4 will see fit to also vote yes on the bill.
The measure continues to exempt trucks used for farm work from the seatbelt provision. SB 458 passed 45-2 and now heads to the House. The Senate today adopted a new plan to create charter schools. If a petition to create a charter school is accepted by the local school board, Senator Dan Weber says SB 457 would allow qualified voters in a referendum to approve or deny a petitioner's request for schools in a high school cluster to become charter schools.
This bill would allow for greater community input into that process if a high school cluster were to seek charter status, and with the approval of the local school board, an actual vote could be held within the attendance zone for the high school. A high school cluster would be the high school, the middle school, and all the elementary schools that feed into it.
Says such referendum shall be held at the next regularly scheduled general election or as may be otherwise authorized at an earlier date by the local Board of Education. That has voting rights implications. That is, it would probably have to be, would be in effect a change in the election law and would require Department of Justice pre-clearance. The bill does not speak to that, and therefore I won't be able to vote for the bill.
Senate Bill 457 did pass 38-11 and now moves to the House.
And speaking of the House today approves a bill, HB 1199. In short, it would allow the Department of Natural Resources to set up a 501c3, essentially a foundation to raise money to make up for some of the budget cuts that department has sustained. Here's Representative Lynn Smith explaining the bill.
Many other of the state's natural resources agencies already have foundations, including Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi, so on. And there are some state agencies as well that have 501c3s. Some of the other points to point out to you about this legislation is that, one, this foundation shall have no regulatory powers and will not conduct governmental functions. The foundation will be subject to all laws relating to open meetings and the inspection of public records. No debt or other obligations incurred by the nonprofit foundation shall constitute an indebtedness or obligation of the state of Georgia. And also it states that it restricts the foundation from holding land. In these times of extensive budget cuts throughout all our state agencies, the Department of Natural Resources has received extensive cuts, needless to say, and this legislation provides the flexibility for this agency to fund certain activities.
Certain activities may actually mean that some companies can name a park after that company. This is how some of these monies may ultimately be used. The bill, again, HB 1199, passed the House today, 173-1. Also in the House today, the House decided to table a bill, House Bill 1328. Essentially, this was going to allow constitutional officers to collect money from local courts and sheriff's office that they normally collect just to do business, but the goal was to raise these fees, these monies that would naturally be coming in, to raise them based on the rate of inflation. Here, take a look at the bill's author.
What this bill does is to adjust the fees that our local constitutional officers collect for the services they render in the probate court, superior court clerk's office, tax commissioner's office, and the sheriff's office. The way this came about 3 years ago, the ACCG put together a study group to look at all the fees of our local constitutional officers and to see if those fees need to be adjusted. And this group consisted of members of all those different constitutional offices that I mentioned, in addition to some judges who served with them. What they found was that many of the fees that are being charged had not been adjusted in about over 20 years. So they recommended that the fees for the local courts be adjusted based upon the rate of inflation from the last time that they'd been adjusted.
I told you that this bill was tabled. The reason it was tabled, it wasn't that anybody was necessarily opposed to raising the fees, but as you probably know, they are using fee increases to balance the budget. So rather than pass this bill plus another bill raising fees, they essentially decided they will merge the two. So again, House Bill 1328 has been tabled for that reason. We'll keep you posted, assuming that they are ultimately, in the end, going to be raising the fees as promised to, again, balance the budget.
And the Senate today voted to increase the amount of money that can be held in the Rainy Day Fund from 10% of the previous year's revenue to 15%. Senate Appropriations Chair Jack Hill said the blow of the current economic downturn was offset by a $1.7 billion shortfall reserve.
When we entered into this recession, and it frankly started out at the end of fiscal year 07, we used some $500 million of that reserve just to get through that year because it kind of came on us unexpectedly. I can tell you that as the state revenues have fallen some $4 billion and compounded by the number of years over the last 2.5 years, we could not have met, as hard as this challenge has been, we could not have met this challenge along with the federal funds from the stimulus funds and from the other funds that we've accumulated. We could not have met that without a healthy revenue shortfall reserve.
SB 421 passed with no opposing votes, and it now needs House approval.
And tonight we continue our leadership series. We have Democratic Whip Edward Lindsey, Representative Edward Lindsey. We started by talking about the budget.
We started 2 years ago with a $21.2 billion budget. We'll close out this year with about a $17.4 billion budget. In terms of the revenue shortfalls, we were looking at about $1 billion several weeks ago. We've got it narrowed down to a couple $100 million now in terms of figuring out how to properly fund some of everything that we want to fund in the budget.
How do you feel about the 1.45% provider fee that the hospitals are going to be paying now?
I feel good about it at this point. The hospitals came to both the executive branch and to our legislative leaders in good faith and negotiated with us a deal that they feel is fair to them and is also fair to the state of Georgia in terms of making sure that we receive back the amount of money that we need in order to provide the medical services that we need to provide to the people of Georgia.
All right. In fairness, the hospitals really didn't want to come to the table, but the governor pretty much strong-armed them and said, you will pay in some way. Would you agree? Is that a good assessment?
In fairness, we're all having to do things this year that we may not ordinarily like to do, including our families back home who are having to sit around the kitchen table and make hard decisions. They're having to make hard decisions back home regarding their personal budget, and we're having to make hard decisions here at the state capitol. So everyone is having to choke down and look at the situation honestly and figure out what exactly has to be done for the good of all the people of Georgia.
Assuming that the hospital provider fee has in fact been put to bed, does that pretty much sew up the end of the budget problem?
I think it does when you add together the hospital provider fee with also the fees that we are going to put into place in terms of fees for government services. I think between those two, we are going to be able to fill that gap and balance the budget.
All right. We're looking at, obviously, day 29 here. There's just one more day, day 30, to get some House bills out of the House and over to the Senate. That's crossover day. What are the big ticket items that you're still looking to see move from House to Senate?
Well, the big ticket items that we have this year include water, which we've already passed an excellent bill in both the House and the Senate. Transportation bill is currently sitting in the Rules Committee. That's an extremely important bill, particularly for folks in my metro area. It provides for a regional transportation tax that will allow us to fast forward transportation projects.
Right, let me stop you there for a second, because the Speaker did sweep into House Transportation just at the right time. You had mentioned. How do you think in the end that bill will shake out?
I think it's going to shake out with like I said, a regional transportation system in which each particular area of the state gets to fast forward their particular transportation needs. The fact of the matter is transportation needs in Moultrie, Georgia are very different from the transportation needs in my district in Buckhead. We need additional dollars in our area to deal with our local needs. Folks in Moultrie need transportation dollars to deal with their local needs. So it's a win-win for all the areas of the state.
I need to correct myself. Of course, that is the Republican whip, Edward Lindsey, not Democratic. Also, three other things we talked about today. One, Edward Lindsey is extremely happy that some type of water legislation has passed both the House and the Senate. He is hoping that H.R. 1, that would cap property tax assessments, will in fact pass. He's also hoping for some type of ethics reform. He is holding out. He does believe something positive will happen in that area as well.
All right, well, it's time that I've always been waiting for in every show. It's time for our flashback in honor of this, our 40th season.
Tonight, from 1995, the Senate considers allowing voters to directly decide on public initiatives. Longtime anchor Gerald Bryant introduces this story.
Senator Perry McGuire today introduced Senate Resolution 4, setting up the process for a state constitutional amendment and a vote allowing Georgians to decide if they want public initiatives.
There is a need when we become stagnant on the state level and when we can't get certain initiatives on the ballot for there to be a process to do that. But I think the process should be one that's not easy to accomplish unless the proposition merits the full attention of the entire state.
No matter what we do on a floor sub today, this is nothing more than a thinly disguised attempt to kill this bill. You know it, and I know it.
And I am sincerely interested in something that will pass the General Assembly to give our frustrated citizens some voice in this process, a balance in this process.
The people aren't stupid. Every election year they go out there and they make the decision of who's going to represent them, from the school board to the Georgia Senate to the lieutenant governor to the president of the United States. They decided on the lottery. They decided on Big Green, the tree tax.
They make tough decisions every time there's an election. Let's give the voters the right to decide whether they want referendum.
SR 4 passed the Senate 48-6, but didn't make it out of the House. This has been a Lawmakers flashback.
It's so fun to see all of them. Some of them look similar to me. I mean, they've hardly changed. Others maybe a little more so.
A little more hair here, or flipping there.
I was going to say, for the men, it's always the hair.
Of course, if you want more Lawmakers flashbacks, please remember to keep watching our 40th season of Lawmakers. And in other news, the Senate passed Senate Bill 442 today, in which a study panel would provide an emergency water supply plan for the metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District. The panel would submit the emergency plan by September 1st, 2011. Lawmakers' Adam Bridges has the story.
Senator Dan Weber stated that the study would look at long-term water supply needs from an engineering perspective.
All it does is ask the Georgia Environmental Facilities Authority to work with the Metro District in conducting an engineering study to look at the infrastructure currently in the Metro District. And they're going to look at it from the perspective of an emergency plan to deal with possible contingencies in the future.
Senator Renee Unterman stated her concern that this measure would penalize her county for the money it has already spent on interbasin transfers.
And is it not true that in Gwinnett County and Lawrenceville, Georgia, that is where the divide is, that one portion of the county goes into the Atlantic and one portion goes into the Gulf of Mexico?
Yes.
And that we have just invested and invested. And why should Gwinnett County be penalized? Because we had the vision and the knowledge and the capability to be able to perform the interbasin transfer.
Gwinnett County is on a subcontinental divide. Other than Lake Lanier, it is high and dry in a literal sense, and it may become that way under the federal ruling. So I think Gwinnett has very much an interest in this bill.
SB 442 passed 51-0 and now moves to the House. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Adam Bridges.
Now we take you to news from around the state. For that, we need to join Ricky Bevington. Hey, Ricky.
Thank you, Nwandi. Good evening. And good evening to you. Ground is broken as of today for a new biomass energy plant. The Waycross plant will take advantage of the state's forest resources to produce wood pellets. It's a joint venture of a German and a Swedish company. They'll send pellets from Georgia to from the Georgia plant to Europe, and the pellets will help feed Europe's demand for renewable energy. The plant will bring into Georgia at least 75 jobs and $150 million of investment into the southeast corner of the state. Georgia Power has suspended work on environmental controls at two of its oldest coal-fired power plants. The company says it doesn't want to spend any more money at Plant Yates and Plant Branch until it knows whether the Environmental Protection Agency will change the rules regarding emissions. It could happen as early as next month. A spokesperson says there are no plans to close either facility. The Glynn County School Board has rejected giving tasers to school resource officers. Last night's 6-1 vote officially ended the months-long debate there. The school police chief asked for the tasers late last year. Glynn County has 24 officers in 17 schools. Each officer, though, will continue to carry a handgun, pepper spray, and a baton. There is always more Georgia news at our website. We're at gpb.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at GPB News. I'm Ricky Bevington.
All right, Ricky. Thanks so much.
Sure, thanks.
Lawmakers will not be seen tomorrow because the Georgia General Assembly will be in recess. We're going to return with all the latest from under the Gold Dome on Friday at 7 p.m. And if you've missed any part of this program, please tune in when Lawmakers repeats tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. Coming up on GPB Georgia Traveler, tonight's episode features a garden tour of Georgia. That program is missed.
And we want to let you know that the Senate did pass a prohibition on synthetic marijuana earlier today, otherwise known as Pep Spice or K2. So SB 498 did pass 49-0, moved over to the House. And that's it for our 29th legislative day of the 2010 session of the Georgia General Assembly. We'll be back on Friday. I'm Nwandi Lawson.
I'm Susan Hoffman. Please join us Friday for Lawmakers at 7 p.m. only here on GPB.
Good night.
Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.